One invention, above all else, has reshaped the course of human history. It's changed how we live, how we travel, how tall we are. It's even upended the very fabric of our planet and its ecosystem.
And that invention is the fridge, whose history is more pivotal to human progress than you could ever imagine.
As Nicola Twilley puts it, the control of cold unlocked godlike powers for the human species.
For many thousands of years, humans have used the cold to store food and keep it fresh, but they were totally reliant on nature and the seasons. In the warmer months, they had to invent different ways of preserving the food.
This historical battle has been an endless arms race of humans versus bacteria, until one day, in the quite recent past, we figured out a way of harnessing cold's power, forever altering how we eat. But it has not been without its challenges, its twists, and its turns.
Nicola Twilley is the author of the book Frostbite, How Refrigeration Changed Our Food, Our Planet, and Ourselves. And she's here to take us on the fascinating journey of mankind's obsession with keeping things cold.
Nikki, welcome to What We Did Before. It is an absolute pleasure to have you on because your book is the idea that sparked this entire series. So I have you to blame for that.
I'm so delighted.
Yeah.
All the blame can be mine.
I want to start with sort of diving straight in. Is mankind's control of the cold the very bedrock of modern civilization, would you say?
I mean, it does sound a bit dramatic when you put it like that, but I would say that I am not the only person to have said that. As far back as 1931, when, most people in the world didn't have a fridge, there was a journalist called Leonora Baxter who, wrote a piece speculating on what the world would look like without refrigeration. And she was like, our present daily existence would become unworkable. Cities with thousands of inhabitants would fade away. We would be sort of reduced to beasts, struggling to survive. So she already, nearly 100 years ago said our present form of civilization is dependent upon refrigeration. And I think it's only become more dependent ever since. I mean, it's essential infrastructure, even if we don't think of it that way.
So would you say then, if we were like to snap and all fridges were lost, that society, would it collapse or would it just have this fundamental shift? Like what would that look like unfolding?
Well, I can't say it would work out very well for the UK, where most food is imported. And interestingly, actually, at the very start of COVID, I have, friends who work at the Cold Chain Association, do cold chain sort of planning, and they got a call from the government saying, how many refrigerated warehouses do we have here in the UK? Because it's this essential infrastructure, but it's entirely private and commercial. And I do think that without it, at least countries that are reliant on food imports would find themselves in a bind quite quickly. And I think getting food into cities, getting it into people's homes, we just can't do that without refrigeration right now. So there are plenty of places on Earth that would be absolutely fine, but there are a lot of places where society might actually collapse. I mean, you saw what people did with loo rolls. This is much worse.
That's such a good point.
That's true. And I was wondering, is it kind of fair to say that refrigeration in some ways has also shaped the economies of the modern world? So obviously some countries have been allowed to export and import perishable goods these incredible distances. So, you mentioned the UK, we import a lot of food, but there's countries, I think you've mentioned before, Kenya, for example. So, yeah, is it kind of that economies have been completely reshaped by this kind of revolution?
Absolutely. And like you say, it does go both ways. I mean, when refrigeration for meat started being a realistic form of export, that actually sort of essentially saved the economy of New Zealand, you could say. The colonial enterprise there was failing. No one, the colonizers did not have a way to make money. You could not do it on wool alone. And they had no way of monetizing the meat on the sheep. And it just was absolutely economically not panning out as a colony. So, I mean, whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, it turns out that the ability to freeze meat and ship it to England is what made New Zealand viable as a British colony and allowed that colonization to sort of really become complete. So, and that's a historical example, but you see it today, where, as you mentioned, Kenya, or in recent years, Chile in South America has just absolutely transformed its economy into export of, asparagus. And it's just... without the ability to do that, huge chunks of those countries' GDP would be gone.
Okay. And one thing that you've mentioned before is that there's some parts to this change, for example, with the Kenya example, where maybe the caveats are that it's not just simply, it's enabled them to export things, but actually it's consolidated some wealth to kind of a few larger farms or ones that are maybe already owned by global corporations. Maybe it contributes to water shortages. So do you think there are sort of caveats to this, that it's part of the GDP? Maybe there are some negatives generally?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I mean, development professionals often sort of promote refrigeration, sustainable goals folks, Gates Foundation, they will promote refrigeration. The EU has grants for it as a way for a country to build its income, lift farmers out of poverty, etc. The trouble, as you discover if you actually visit the countries and research this, is that economically the smallholder farmers that are the really poor farmers in countries like Rwanda and Kenya, they cannot actually afford to refrigerate their food for export. And so what happens is when those, Kenyan green beans are showing up in Waitrose, they are coming from one of 8 mostly white-owned farms that can afford all the... and it's not just the equipment, which is really expensive, and keeping it running, which is really expensive and difficult. It's also, the supermarkets in the West have very stringent quality control, very stringent, safety procedures, and following all of those, that's not something you can do if you're just a tiny smallholder. So it is really hard to make work for the poorest of the poor, and as a result it does sort of just lead to cheaper, blueberries and green beans for us in the West, and a consolidation of wealth among the people who are already wealthy in the countries that are exporting. And the environmental cost is huge. You don't turn sort of half of your country into sort of an asparagus producing region without depleting your aquifer. It just, a lot of things that need irrigation, it's tough.
I want to sort of take us on a bit of a romp through history, because you mentioned that refrigeration is celebrated now, and that certainly has not been the case throughout history. And we're never going to do your entire book justice in this short conversation, but there are a few bits I would like to pick up on that really fascinated me when I was listening to the audiobook. In fact, I'm very acquainted with your voice, so it's quite nice. It feels very comforting to be listening to you again. But Nikki, you make a comparison early in the book about the size of the refrigeration sector in the US, and you compared it to Mount Everest, and also called it the artificial cryosphere, which I love. And I think you described it even as the new Arctic. So can you guide us through that and just how big it really is?
Yeah, I mean, this I think was it sort of blew my mind when I realized, and it is quite hard to find out how big it really is, because most refrigerated warehouses are privately owned. These sort of data are just not publicly available. So I had to do quite a bit of sort of digging to try to get a good estimate of the size of what I started calling the artificial cryosphere. You know, the natural cryosphere is all the glaciers and the poles, naturally frozen regions. And this, I thought, was the artificial cryosphere, artificially frozen regions. In the US alone, we're talking about 5.5 billion cubic feet, which is a larger volume than Mount Everest. It's growing 20% globally every couple of years at the current rate. So, you know, as we're talking, it's getting bigger. And what's interesting about that is, of course, the natural cryosphere is shrinking. So I really came to see that this artificial cryosphere at this point is becoming, you know, a third pole. As we sort of shrink down the North Pole, the artificial cryosphere is getting up to the same volume of frozen space, which is astonishing.
The ice caps are melting, but it's fine because we're making our own ones.
I mean, the control of nature, it's never not worked, am I right?
No, exactly. It's always beneficial, isn't it? Always a good idea. Now, I mean, controlling the cold has been something that we've wrestled with as humanity for time immemorial. And it really is only recently that we've kind of come to grips with how to harness it in any sort of measurable, tangible way, which has reshaped the world. You know, if you look, you mentioned in the book, some of the greatest scientific minds of the past just couldn't understand cold. You had people like Galileo, Leonardo da Vinci, but you say Descartes came close.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, first of all, it blows my mind that, you know, we've controlled heat with fire since before we were modern Homo sapiens. And some people argue that is how we became Homo sapiens. We have not had a handle on cold for more than a couple hundred years, really. And it baffled people. People thought it was like a cold, it sort of, maybe there was a cold spring at the North Pole that sort of filtered, streams of it filtered out. They thought there was something called frigorific atoms that maybe brought cold. Or maybe it was underground, stored underground and sort of leaked upwards. Who knew? And so it was a complete mystery. And I was astonished when I read in Descartes, this is in the 1640s, a long time before the laws of thermodynamics in the 1800s. He was comparing cold to the existence of God, and he was, you know, trying to figure out, is God real? And he said, well, if people say cold is not real, it's just the absence of heat, then it's not something real and positive in itself. And he was using it as a sort of way to think about, is God real, or is it, you know, but actually he was right. There is no such thing as cold. It is just the absence of heat. And cooling is just this sort of sensation of loss of heat as that heat is transferred elsewhere. And I think it's astonishing also in the 21st century, 200 years after the laws of thermodynamics were formulated, how that's news still to a lot of people. I mean, I'm not a physicist, so I was like, oh, right, yeah, it is just the absence of something else. And I think that's why it took us so long to get a handle on it scientifically.
Okay. And I was wondering, sort of, this is a little bit different to the Descartes point, but can you guide us through some of the maybe some of the techniques that ancient humans or humans prior to the invention of fridges relied on, and how long did that last?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you think, civilization would break down without fridges, it's like, well, we've had a lot of civilization without fridges. And from basically all of human history, humans have had to work out what to do with food to make it last. We've been fighting this sort of war against, microbes that want to eat our food before we can get to it. And so you have a huge range of techniques developed. Refrigeration is sort of really just one of the latest. It's a new arrival. People have been drying food, so you get rid of water that way. And if you've got rid of water, then the microbes aren't happy. Soon after that, people started salting, and sugaring works the same way. You reduce water availability. The ancient Greeks were big fans of using honey to preserve in that way. Apparently, Alexander the Great is mummified in honey because he wouldn't rot. Okay. I know. So goes the story. I don't think we know where he's buried. So
I want to be mummified in honey.
I mean, the option is there. People make things very alkaline or very acidic. So you get sort of pickles or more rare these days using lye to sort of, get very odd sort of Scandi fish type things. You can take away the oxygen that the microbes need to survive using fat. So that's like a comfy. You can boil it to kill them. I mean, there's a huge range of ways to sort of fight this ongoing battle against bacteria. And oftentimes we would combine methods. Sometimes we'd also recruit microbial allies. So this is like cheese. You put in the bacteria to sour the milk, and then you also use salt and physical pressure to get rid of the water. So you're using fermentation to fight off, good bacteria to fight off the bad ones, and you're using physical and chemical methods to make it inhospitable to microbes. The crazy thing about all of these techniques is they result in our most delicious and flavorful food. So nice side benefit, longer lasting, often more portable, and real flavor bombs, especially in a world where we would have been relying on a lot of grain and extremely boring food otherwise. So food preservation before refrigeration is just really one of the triumphs of human creativity.
Yeah, I think more incredible, though, is that they had come across and, maybe stumbled across, maybe intentionally invented these methods of preservation before understanding what the bacteria were even doing. So they'd figured out that before they had the scientific method, what they had to do to make sure bacteria didn't thrive and that food didn't rot.
Oh, absolutely. It's incredible. I mean, late Paleolithic, 12,000 BCE, they're already using sun and wind to dry meat. And no one's going to even have a clue what a bacteria is for thousands and thousands of years after that. So it is amazing.
And also there's something I've read about is they've unearthed something called bog butter. I don't know if you know anything about this, but so the idea, I think, was that food would be stored in bogs and then pulled out later. What was going on there?
Well, it's getting rid of oxygen, isn't it? So it's this anaerobic environment where the microbes aren't happy. That's how you get bog bodies too, which are essentially mummified in the bogs. And there's sort of lots of tannins in bogs, which are very powerful antimicrobials in and of themselves. So yeah, it works to preserve.
I love the idea of the sort of first person who's like, right, do you want to try that or not? or is it going to be you? Like, I don't fancy that. It looks disgusting.
There was, thank goodness for the people who weren't picky eaters.
Yeah, exactly. And Royston Cave in England as well, you said that there was overnight butter that was found there that could have been stored there by the Knights Templar, right?
Yeah, so butter already has a slightly longer shelf life than milk. You've already done some work you've salted it, you've removed some water, you've soured it slightly, particularly in the olden days. And so it already has a slightly longer shelf life, but it's going to melt if it gets warm, even in England. And so I love this story. It's a few miles south of Cambridge, and it's this sort of underground space with these very intriguing carvings. People thought it might be a pagan temple. They thought it might be a hermit hole. And this woman called Sylvia Beeman, who is sort of a hero in my story, she's a huge underground explorer, actually started something called Subterranean Britannica, which is an amazing kind of underground exploration organization in the UK. She is the one who figured out it is likely was storage site for the Knights Templar who sold butter at the Cambridge market and had to store it overnight. They bring it in. You need it's like a Waitrose distribution center. And so she connected those carvings to a better documented French dungeon with similar carvings. It's not proven. No one's got a sort of smoking gun there, but that is the prevailing theory.
So this one's maybe a bit more personal for me and Ollie, at least. So we're both from the Channel Islands, actually. And one point in your book, you say that Jersey may be home to the oldest known ice cave, and it may have stored mammoth meat. So how could it be that an island like Jersey could have that accolade?
I don't want you to think that you're special, because actually these were probably in many other places too. But what happened is this one has really been researched because Sylvia Beeman, after she sort of got intrigued by this Royston cave, that started her down a path of studying archaeology. She went to Cambridge, and her dissertation research was on this natural cave in Jersey, which she theorized was used for mammoth meat storage, 140,000 years ago. And she did experimental archaeology. She did other kinds of research. So that was her theory. I don't think it's that this is necessarily the world's oldest. It's just this is the one that has been studied. But carry on thinking you're special if you'd like.
Oh no, that's fine by us because we're actually from Guernsey, so and we're quite competitive. So we'd be quite happy to take that accolade back off Jersey. That's totally fine.
Yes.
I'm sure there's one on Guernsey too. I'm absolutely certain of it. Don't worry.
You don't have any to hand, do you? Just to make us feel a little bit better.
Honestly, there's probably one on Alderney. You can all have them.
Well, I'm just impressed that you know of Alderney's existence, even. So yeah, fair play.
I used to go on family holidays to Guernsey, so actually to Herm.
Herm's
wow.
beautiful. Yeah,
deep cut.
Yes, definitely. So, on a sort of similar topic, I guess, can you sort of tell us maybe about the ice trade and how ice harvesting would have worked?
Well, yeah. So the entire point of Sylvia Beeman's research was to say, listen, people knew that cold preserved food. That's another way to do it. Cold slows down how fast bacteria reproduce. So it's just another way of preserving food. And it's just the same way we noticed that drying worked, we would have noticed that cold worked. And we would have used natural snow and ice to preserve food. And what happened, quite early on, is that people realized, you could harvest this ice or snow and you could store it, often in underground caves, and that would make it last longer. And then you'd be able to use it when it was summer and there wasn't any natural snow and ice. And so that ice harvesting really started early in ancient Babylon, but it got going and organized in the 1800s in the US. And that's where you get all special tools being developed for it and people doing it like an industry and exporting it around the globe. And it's really quite fun. There are a few places in the US where you can still go and harvest ice this way. And you put it in these little wooden ice houses, just look like, barns, and they're very well insulated barns, and it lasts through the summer, boiling hot. It's incredible.
Yeah, the only time I've ever seen this is at the start of the Disney movie Frozen. So I've watched it more times than I care to admit.
No shame.
I have two young daughters, 5 and 2, so I have an excuse. So in the opening scene, there's this group of men using picks and carts to harvest ice. And honestly, I'll be honest here, I had no idea why they were doing that. It was a bit of a mystery to me, but I sort of just rolled with it. And I don't know when it dawned on me that this was a trade that they were showcasing from the past. But anyway, it kind of, you mentioned in the book that Frozen and this scene actually caused a surge of interest in this ancient technique, didn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing. When I actually went, there's a lake in Maine where they still do the traditional ice harvest, and I went up to participate because I thought, I should see what it's like to do this, really. And there are about 15 different little girls dressed as Elsa. So families have brought their kids along to, it was a lot of fun. The ice harvesting itself is not something a princess would do, but it was and it was hard work, but it was really, really fascinating. They had all the old tools there, and you just sort of slice up the pond and then into these giant ice cubes and move them along, and then and there's a set of tools for breaking them off, piking them along the empty channels, getting them, horses to get them up the ramp into the ice house, and then sort of storing them closely there. So it was quite a fun day out.
So you got saws and what tools would they have used exactly?
Oh yeah, there's saws. So you sort of grid it out into with saws into looks sort of like an ice chessboard, and then you use these things called breaker bars to sort of snap off the big cubes. They're I don't know, let's say half a meter in all dimensions, and you just kind of. Then you use a sort of pike to kind of pull it gently kind of nudge it along the open part of the water where you've already got out some ice cubes. So, and then there's a set of tools for sort of directing it into the right place in the ice house when it's coming down the chute. And that part is for professionals only. You can break your ankle when the ice is coming at you. So.
I can imagine, yeah. So actually, I find it fascinating that during this time of sort of shipping snow and ice around, there was actually, because it was a commodity, this led to kind of criminal attacks, right? So it makes sense, but it seems quite bizarre, the idea of snow heists. But this is something you've written about, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, think about it. The only supply we had was a natural supply. So already it's limited. Then you're bringing it in from quite far away. So anytime you have something imported over a distance, it's a luxury and it costs a lot of money. And so, only the wealthy have access to it. And at the same time, people want it because, first of all, cold is lovely in the summer. And second of all, it's worth money. So one of the things that I came across that I loved was a letter from a Medici cardinal in 1600s Italy writing to the chief of police in Rome, this long, angry letter about how his snow shipments were being stolen en route and how to keep the snow safe so that the Medici could have all the ice cream that their hearts desired.
Wow.
It kind of sounds like a joke now, but it really was like important.
Oh yeah, it was a huge luxury. There's an amazing letter from ancient Greece from Pliny being like, I got some snow for this dinner party and you ghosted me and I'm going to charge you for the snow because it was expensive. He also got oysters and snails and something else, but special wine. Oh, that was all fine, but the snow he was really angry about.
Yeah, it's now just really wet here.
Exactly. Doesn't last.
Yeah. Oh, that'd be so annoying. So, can you talk to us about how ice tunnels may have been responsible for legends like Britain's hobbits?
This is again Sylvia Beeman, who I love, but she went down this rabbit hole literally, and she spent more than a decade just kind of creating this gazetteer of ice houses. Like, where are all the ice houses in Britain? And she started off thinking there would be maybe, a couple of hundred, and she ended up with thousands, most of which had been, weren't on any maps or planning. So there were just hundreds and hundreds of them. And actually you still see stories of, they'll be digging something in London and they'll come across an ice house, just sort of hole in the ground. It sort of conjures up this picture of like England with all these sort of lost voids, like formerly used for storing cold underneath. And there's a expert on Scottish vernacular architecture who wrote about this, and he said, this is probably where we get a lot of our myths of sort of hobbits and forest creatures, because these ice houses are set away from the house. They're often in a shaded sort of hilly area, and you get these doors opening directly into the earth, and then a little tunnel down to a roundish room. That's perfect for a hobbit. You can see Bilbo moving in, prime real estate. So
Absolutely.
Yes.
I want to sort of go to, you mentioned this sort of the start of the ice trade and how it, obviously snow and ice was being used, but really a trade emerged thanks to Frederick Tudor, right? He became known as the Ice King.
Another legend, yeah.
A massive legend. I love the backstory that you give of him throughout the book is, he dropped out of school. He decided that he had a few ideas, didn't he? But he decided he was going to pursue this ice thing. It didn't go well for a long time.
Everything wrong. He did everything wrong. It was amazing. I love him.
And eventually, I think this was while he was trying to get his ice business going, he was on a trip in the Caribbean, I think, right? And it dawned on him that, if the locals there tasted the refreshing nature of a cool drink, that they would never want to go back again. And, this is obviously a place where they don't just get ice and snow. And I never really thought of our love of cooled beverages as being an addiction, but actually it kind of is, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, It's really interesting looking at the history of this, because at first people are often nervous or unsure about cooled things and cold drinks. And there's an amazing description of the world's first ice cream headache, or at least the first one written about, which is sort of a British naval officer and goes to Sicily, where ice cream was common at the time. Britain didn't have it. And, puts this gigantic spoonful of ice cream in his mouth, no warning, absolutely loses his mind, starts beating the nearest servant. But once people had tried it, they didn't want to go back. Once they'd experienced the delight of something cool in summer, cool drink, ice cream, they loved it. And so there's this letter from in the 1840s, a middle-aged Englishwoman who visited America. And at the time, ice was much more common, mainly because there's so much natural ice in the northeastern US. And she loved the ice. And there's this amazing line: whenever you hear America abused, remember the ice. I mean, we can do some bad things here in America, but we've got ice. So yeah, people, once they tried it, it was hard to go back, certainly.
Yeah, like I couldn't have a warm can of Coke now. Like,
that's just Coke is formulated to only taste right if it's cold. I mean, when they first started selling it, the tagline they told all the soda fountain guys, it's got to be cold if it's going to be sold, because it tastes disgusting at room temperature.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So without refrigeration, there would be no Coke.
Oh no. Yeah.
Oh, I wonder how many brands we could say that about without refrigeration. Their existence wouldn't.
That's true.
Well, the whole of you don't have any jelly without cold, so that's all round trees, jellies, and all that, all gone. Angel Delight, nope. Yep.
I'm not sure I could live without jelly.
I know that's a big one for a lot of people.
Yeah. And
I'm showing my age.
Yeah. I also want to talk about, this is another legend, because he has this incredible story where so this is the story of canning, the history of canned goods, and how it was first developed thanks to the growth of Napoleon's army in France, right? And the guy who invented it, he ended up dying a pauper, if I'm correct, if I remember correctly.
Well, he gave away the technology, bless his sweetheart. So this is a guy called Nicola Twilley. He's a confectioner. And what happened is Napoleon puts together the largest army the world's ever seen. It's more than 1 million men. And so traditionally armies had fed off the land. They just eat whatever, they march and they eat wherever they are. Some hardship for the locals, but it was fine. When you have more than 1 million men, that's not going to work. And so Napoleon launches this cash prize in 1795, anyone who can figure out a better way to preserve food to feed his army. And Nicola Twilley, as a confectioner, he stored sugared fruit in glass jars as a sort of delicacy, a treat. And he thought, well, maybe I could do that with savory food too, in glass jars. Would it work? Could I sort of jam them, as it were, and so he starts out putting beef stew into champagne bottles and wine. Well, if you have them lying around,
Yeah, why not?
and boiling them, and succeeds in inventing canning. Right, he thinks this is such a boon to humanity. I can't sort of sit on this information, and so wrote a book explaining exactly how to do it and gave away the technology. His wife at some point left him, I think, probably disgusted at and he did die poor, but sounds like a lovely individual. So poor went out for him.
It's sad because he created something that we're still living with today, and yet he didn't sort of reap the benefits of it.
I will say it didn't become useful until a British person invented the can opener. So it was.
I've canned all this food. Yeah, how do we open it?
Yeah,
you don't.
Exactly. A little bit of competition there. It was honestly 30 years later too. So
so obviously we have confectioner that gave us the gift of canning, but something that you've discussed is that beer brewers often come up with the most innovations for the use of cold. So why do you think that is?
I love this. It turns out that, alcohol is responsible for all human progress, essentially, because this is my master theory. But, it's highly plausible that alcohol inspired agriculture in the first place. And certainly for refrigeration, it was brewing that inspired mechanical refrigeration. The first working refrigeration machines were built for and sold to breweries, one to Truman's in London, one to a brewery in Australia. The brewers were the largest consumers of natural ice. And as sort of, there would be ice famines, it was unreliable. As demand grew, they were like, we can't rely on this. And that provided the impetus for entrepreneurs and engineers to develop machines that worked. There's a lot of R&D that goes into building this entirely new technology, and it's the brewing industry that pays for that.
It's really fascinating because in an episode coming up in a few weeks, we're going to be speaking to a guy about the history of chocolate. So sort of what came before the modern chocolate bar. That is a fascinating history. And actually, it turns out that beer brewers are responsible in part for the discovery of chocolate as well. So I think beer and alcohol just has such an incredible part to play in everything that we have in modern civilization in some way, shape or form.
Innovation comes from motivation, and motivation is to do with getting hold of some booze, apparently. So
yeah, exactly. It's as simple as that. We're really not complex as a species.
Exactly.
So obviously it's very different today, but in the past you said that in London, most carcasses could only travel about, I think it was 80 miles before reaching their destination in the time before fridges. So was that the maximum basically, or was there any scope for that to change pre-fridge life?
I mean, if you think about it, we're talking about a time, and it was in the 1850s when a British physician wrote this and said 80 miles is the farthest distance from which carcasses ever came. You're talking about a time before the spread of railways, let alone cars. So think about the speed at which things are moving. It's not it's not fast. And things would go bad. So you actually had a really constrained amount of time, which translated to a very constrained distance before that you could move dead meat, which is why most meat came to cities alive, because it could, that extended its shelf life, essentially.
Yeah, it sort of had to walk itself to slaughter, right?
Exactly. Even and amazingly, turkeys, they used to sort of herd them along the street, which I can't even imagine. That again sounds like a joke, herding turkeys.
Yeah.
It must have been quite sad to see, actually, seeing a line of them all being walked. You know why they're going, right?
A march of death, yeah.
It's
only
a death march.
They don't know.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
What I mean, that to me feels quite... So, I mean, we're doing plenty of awful things to animals right now. The abuse of animals is
out of sight is the
out
thing.
Out of sight, exactly. But back then, what were some of the sort of disgusting parts of pre-fridge life? Because you talk in the book about urban meat slaughter and some of the foul ways that meat was kept as well, don't you?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is the interesting thing. I mean, now I think we would find industrial meat slaughter equally revolting, to be honest, in a lot of ways. We just don't see it. It happens in the middle of nowhere. But of course, it couldn't happen in the middle of nowhere if you're trying to feed a city. And so you get this, I mean, and it shows up in the most random of places like Dickens' Great Expectations. Pip complains about how disgusting Smithfield Market is. It's all a smear with filth and fat and blood and foam. But if you're slaughtering enough cattle to feed the population of London in the middle of London, in the middle of summer, it's just going to be... There's no way of gathering all that blood and the fat. The way we monetize those byproducts now, those are just running into the sewers down the street, So it was pretty grim. And I think there was definitely no way at the time you would have not known what it took to get meat onto your plate, because you would have smelled it and you would have seen it.
Well, we were in were traveling, my wife and I, and we went through some of the markets in Cambodia, and we saw some of the ways that the chickens had been kept. And I won't go into the gory details here, but she was put off chicken for quite a while afterwards. It certainly didn't eat it while we were traveling. And so as soon as it's out of sight, it is out of mind. And it's really fascinating to hear that it was on the streets in this way, and yet people still were happy for it to be served up on their plates.
Well, I mean, there's a sort of certain aspect of it where how old it is, because it can't be any older than a certain amount of time, because otherwise it would have completely gone rotten. So I think, we were used to sort of this nice chilled, plastic wrapped pack sitting on its little sort of absorbent pad in the supermarket. And that feels safe to us. To someone who is not thinking in a sort of refrigerated way, you're thinking, well, I know it must be safe because it can't be older than a certain amount of time. Otherwise, I'd physically be able to see it's it's rotting. So there is a weird sort of logic to that, but it is off-putting to if you're used to a refrigerated lifestyle, to just see sort of someone gently waving a fan over or sort of throwing a bucket of cold water over the slaughtered meat. It's always a bit like, really.
Wow. I love this notion that you mentioned, that there was a time before the average American diet, which is a whole episode in itself. But you say average Americans would have eaten corn, oats, milk, and a lot of meat, actually more meat than we eat today, including squirrels. So,
sorry.
Yeah, lovely thought. How recently were they eating like this? When was the diet kind of like that?
Well, as late as 1800 in the US, in the UK, because the Industrial Revolution came earlier and it's a smaller country, diets nationalized a little more quickly. But before you have railways, before you have refrigeration, you have to eat locally. And so that does mean what's available locally, and it means a very diverse selection of meat. So you're going to be eating game birds and pigeons and such like, as opposed to it's seasonal, it's local, and it's not the same as, 300 miles away, but where the resources are completely different. And at the time, cities were still tiny. In the 1800s, American cities were absolutely miniature. And so that you didn't have this issue of having to move food over long distances, so no one bothered.
So moving a little further to, I guess, the inception of the kind of world that we know today. So can you talk to us about what the sort of first fridges looked like, the first invention of the fridge?
Yeah, so the scientific principle behind it was demonstrated first in 1755. A Scottish doctor just sort of worked out you need vacuum pumps, you need to evaporate something that's very volatile. He wrote it up and was like, well, this is interesting. Someone should look into it. No one did. It wasn't until the 1850s that the first commercial units were sold, and they were the size of houses. So they're steam powered. You're not plugging anything into the mains at that point in history. So it's a steam engine combined with this vacuum pump sort of evaporating the volatile fluid, which is the refrigerant fluid that's drawing the heat out. And so you've got both of those elements combined. So they were gigantic, and it looks like someone has glued a steam engine onto sort of the intestines of a diesel engine or something. It's really, they're quite terrifying looking machines.
And there was just generally a lot of fear around mechanical refrigeration in the early days, wasn't there? So there
rightly so.
Yeah, there was the death at the Chicago World's Fair showing the first fridge, wasn't there?
Yeah, this was amazing. So you get the first commercial machinery being sold in the 1850s, the Chicago World's Fair in 1893. So you'd think, okay, maybe the technology's worked out the kinks. Absolutely not. So they had a refrigerated warehouse at the World's Fair. It was known as the greatest refrigerator on earth. It was sort of one of the spectacles in and of itself. The fair also had the world's first Ferris wheel, the first movie theater, all kinds. But this was something that people wanted to come and see too. It's done up like a Venetian palazzo. And what happened was it caught light. Sadly, the firefighters climbed up the tall chimney stack and then realized they couldn't get down, and so they were dropping to the roof of the refrigerator warehouse, which was this sticky tar paper, and then they were getting stuck to that and being burned alive. The absolute nightmare. The entire crowd at the World's Fair sort of is panicking, so you have tens of thousands of people being held back. The cowboys from Buffalo Bill's Wild West show did crowd control, but it was a I was on the front page of all the newspapers, terrifying. Lots of firefighters died, huge tragedy, and it's because these things were deadly, and the gases that were used to act as the refrigerant gases, so there's a volatile liquid that evaporates and draws off the heat. They were using ammonia, and ammonia is deadly, still is today. If you actually get an ammonia leak, I mean, one of the guys who ran a refrigerator warehouse that I worked at said, if you see that, you're seeing death.
Wow.
It is actually quite deadly still. So in the early days when the machinery was not, as refined as today, they really were. They would blow up, people would lose eyes, limbs. It was a risky business.
It's amazing, really, that we kind of continued with them in that case, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's another interesting thing where it's quite a... in the early days, it's not immediately that everyone sees the first refrigerators and is like, oh, yes, this is what we've been waiting for. There was a lot of fear around them, and not just because of the fact that they were bound to explode, but also because people didn't think refrigerated food was safe.
Yeah, and people, I guess, got used to things like their ice boxes and their ice houses. They were part of daily life. It was quite known. It was a known quantity for them. Don't start giving AI advocates ideas about, we think it's dangerous now, but it'll be fine in the future. So I think that's the concern here that we're going down with the fridge. But actually, to your point, you mentioned it was safety and health, which was a cause for concern as well in those early days. So I think you mentioned that gastrointestinal diseases were the third biggest killer of the time. So why were, you think refrigeration, that brings about longer lifespan for the food, which means healthier, right? But why was it that there were health issues with early refrigeration then?
Yeah, it's interesting. And so, okay, some of that gastrointestinal disease, which really was a huge killer, and you don't think about it today. Some of that was the water. We didn't have water treatment. But some of it was refrigeration. And that's confusing because today we think refrigeration keeps food safe, right? This is what's going to stop bacteria reproducing. But the problem was when, these early machines were being built, we didn't know how to use it. We had no idea what temperature to store things at, how long you could store things at. They were very... rudimentary machines in the sense that you would get a lot of temperature fluctuation. They would go in and out. They might fail. And yet at the same time, you're using them to transport food over long distances and store it for long amounts of time. So that's a long time for bacteria to reproduce if anything does go wrong, which it did. So at the beginning, because of, refrigeration is sort of faulty, it actually turns out to make food less safe. And you get these incredible reports of cheese poisonings, ice cream poisonings, people being, it's headline news. If you search the newspapers of the era in the 1880s and 1890s, when this early form of refrigeration is starting to be used, you find people terrified, and rightly so, because they're dying from food poisoning. But it's because refrigeration has not been, it's been used, but not being used well enough.
Yeah, it was almost like used too liberally to the expectation was you could just refrigerate anything no matter for how long and it would be safe. But right. Actually, you can't refrigerate a rotten egg and it suddenly turns unrotten. It's still going to be rotten.
It's not magic.
Exactly. And also you discuss, just to sort of add to the list of legends that you discuss, was the Dr. Pennington and the important role that she played in making cold storage safer, right?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I mean, to use your AI analogy, at the start, people were like, oh, this stuff is magic. It can do everything. And it was clear that it absolutely couldn't. And what was needed were some guidelines, some guardrails, some regulation. And this is what Polly Pennington, who is an absolute legend, one of my favorite people in the book, a woman who made her way in this world when absolutely everything was against her. She basically spent her career figuring out, okay, what temperature should chicken be stored at? What about eggs? How long can you store them? What happens if it goes out of temperature? How long do you have to bring it back down? How quickly do you have to cool it after you've milked the cow or slaughtered the cattle or whatever? She did huge amounts of research seeing where the problems were. Like she rode trains round the country, taking the temperature and seeing, are these fluctuations dangerous? What do we need to do? Does there need to be more ice? Is the air circulating? She started work in 1907. And a measure of her success is by the 1930s, attitudes in America had flipped from being refrigerated food is dangerous to, well, if it isn't refrigerated, it's not safe. So she single-handedly sort of made that transformation happen by putting in place the regulations to make sure that refrigeration was done safely and wasn't putting people's health at risk.
And could it be argued that sort of cold storage and refrigeration gave rise to the modern city as an idea or as the kind of thing that we see today?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you couldn't have a city of the cities of the sizes we have and feed them without something as effective as refrigeration. I mean, I suppose it doesn't have to actually be a refrigeration. There are other forms of food preservation still being invented today. But without that, you can't feed a city. This is the fundamental sort of crisis. And really, it's not a coincidence that refrigeration was invented at a time when London became the first city in the world to get to sort of 2 million, then 3 million people, the largest city the world had ever seen, and you run into a crisis. How do you feed it? And so that's really yes, beer is the spur, but without that form of preservation, you can't feed a city.
Yeah, and fridges also kind of led to the death of being a butcher as the profession. Well, not quite the death, but as we used to know them, and obviously the ice trade. So, are there any other professions that kind of got the chop as a result of this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, a lot of professions became very geographically specialized. So previously, you would have been able to, raise cattle anywhere where you were near a city. Suddenly, no, you have to, because you can transport them, you have to go where you can raise them, where it's economically feasible to do it at scale. So it led to a lot of consolidation, certainly. Death of the butcher, as we know it, death of the iceman eventually, once you have a mechanical refrigerator, for sure.
And how fragile is the global cold chain today? Like, how close do we operate to failure? Because we talked about what would happen if we did lose it, but is it quite precarious?
Yeah, it's a great question. I almost don't want to know the answer. I do think we are very dependent on it. And I think, this sort of panicked call from government officials to the Cold Chain Association saying how many refrigerated warehouses are there gives you a sense that, yes, this is essential. And if for some reason, this is our stockpile, as it were. And so without that, our food supply is cut off. And I think people would rapidly go a little mad without, the shelves are empty. You see what happens. So I do actually think that we operate closer to the edge than most people know. And I also think it's really interesting that this is not considered essential infrastructure and it's not typically government sort of regulated or it's operated privately and for profit. And so you don't have a lot of extra bandwidth because why would you? That wouldn't make you money. So that's
capitalism.
I mean, for real.
But there are consequences of our conquest of the cold. You say that the harnessing of the cold changed our height and the size of animals and the killing off of species. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's amazing. So I tried to track the impact of, is refrigeration actually a good thing? And it's a hard question to answer. I mean, it's a really important question to answer if you're writing a whole book about it. But, what impact has it had on our health? And it's really hard to tease out because so many things happen at the same time. You do get water treatment. You get the discovery of antibiotics and all sorts of things. One thing that one economist teased out at immensely painful detail and a lot of scraping together of very obscure numbers is that, yes, refrigeration actually added measurable height to the average American and presumably Britain as well, because they were eating so much extra protein. And so you can see that translate to a fraction of an inch of growth in height. Now, the context for that is that they had lost height before that due to urbanization and the Industrial Revolution. So they'd been eating better. Then they moved to cities. It's called the antebellum puzzle or something like that, where all measures of public health just go absolutely down the toilet briefly because people move to cities pre-refrigeration and their health measures and their nutritional standards go down the drain. And then refrigeration helps turn that around. I argue in the book it has a lot of extra costs on top of that, but it certainly did give us a little bit more protein.
Yeah, well, we haven't been able to go through everything in the book. It is definitely well worth a read or listen to the audiobook, Frostbite. It is incredible. I just want to end on this final note. What I really loved about your book is that it made me feel so fortunate and lucky to have been born in this era with all the hard work that was put in by our ancestors to make our lives so unbelievably comfortable now. We live like kings and queens of the past. And I think for that reason alone, it does pay to look back at history like this. So Nicola Twilley, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for joining us on the podcast.
Likewise. Thank you so much. It's been delightful.
A massive thank you to Nikki for joining us on the podcast. This is What We Did Before. I'm Ollie.
And I'm Matt. Have you got any ideas for an episode? Please let us know in the comments and we'll be sure to credit you in the outro if we use your idea.
And do subscribe if you enjoyed the episode. It helps us out massively. And we will see you next time.
See you next time.